As companies explore artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, additional legal questions are popping up, but we're also finding out that the legal industry itself is exploring these tools. We're going to talk about new ways that lawyers are using AI tools on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Shaw. Welcome to Today in Tech. Joining me on the show today is Paul Lopez. He is a labor and employment attorney with South Florida-based Tripp Scott. Paul has more than 30 years of experience in commercial litigation and advises business owners and HR executives about compliance regulation on labor and employment laws. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks for having me, Keith. Good to be with you.
Yeah, Paul, we've got a news hook to talk about in the world of ChatGPT, especially. There was this story that came out a few weeks ago about an attorney that was using ChatGPT to do some research for a brief, and that sounds good enough, but then he got in trouble because he forgot to verify the cases that ChatGPT had given him, and it turns out that the AI was making up some of these things. So you're familiar with this case, right?
We are, yeah. No, we paid very close attention to it because, one of my other hats that I wear around here is I happen to be the managing partner of my law firm, so we are trying to be very sensitive to the pros and the cons of how this ChatGPT can be used, and this was obviously a glaring example of what the pitfalls are of using ChatGPT and then just strictly 100% relying on it without actually double checking the references and the case sites and some of the things that ChatGPT included in this guy's brief. So yeah, this was a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
ChatGPT and what exposure and what problems it can create for you.
Yeah, when we were talking before the show, this was a few weeks ago, and before we were going to initially we were going to do the show, the news hadn't come out about this yet. And one of the discussions that you and I had ahead of this episode was, how is ChatGPT being integrated into law firms? And I think one of the things you said, and you could still say, obviously, you could still say that this is being used for, but was for research purposes of kind of finding existing case law and things like that. But in this case, it was surprising that ChatGPT basically came up with fake cases. And does that put a chill on the use of ChatGPT, at your law firm or at other law firms when you talk to other lawyers?
I think 100%, Keith, because look, what this is a perfect example of why you as a lawyer, it can definitely serve as a great tool to get you started, right? It can find so much information so quickly.
Yeah.
It definitely can help you with being efficient as a lawyer and maybe getting you on the right trail of an argument and maybe finding some, treatises or cases, but you as the lawyer still, as the human being on the file, right? You have to go double check that those case sites and that those propositions of law are correct. If you do what this guy did in New York and just simply, press the button, have a brief submitted with all this case law that was bogus case law.
Yeah.
I mean, now this guy's facing the ire of the court and frankly, the embarrassment of being exposed for, frankly, just being lazy, right? I mean, he just pressed a button, had a brief submitted, he read it, it sounded great, it looked great, I'm sure it was very persuasive, and then all of a sudden only to find out none of the cases were correct. So, wow. I mean, let's talk about some major exposure to him and perhaps his law firm.
I remember when ChatGPT first came out, there were a lot of discussions about students using this in sort of research papers, and what a lot of students were doing was the exact same thing. It was basically they were asking a question, it spit out some text, and then they didn't read the text, and that's how they were being caught almost. It's not really plagiarism, but, sort of getting caught by their teachers. Like, I'm amazed that this guy just didn't do research and double check all of these case files. And again, maybe it's because he just thought, well, it's an AI. It must be using real case law. Again,
that's
too.
The scary part.
Yeah.
The scary part is that as I read that article and kind of the gist of it was that the brief was so well written and so persuasive that this guy assumed that the case sites were accurate and were correct. But obviously this algorithm and this program is so powerful that, again, it makes stuff up. I mean, just to persuade the reader of a particular position. So again, it's one of those things when it came out last year and we started looking into, what is this all about? How can it be used? Can it help? And look, there's no doubt. Can it help in connection with some of the grunt work of the law, right? Some of the initial research,
Right.
some of the initial finding some authority for a proposition. But again, then the lawyers got to go verify that, hey, those cases are legitimate cases, right?
Yeah.
They say what ChatGPT is saying they say. And that's the job that we lawyers all have. We have to cite cases, make sure they're cited for the proposition we're citing them for. So, look, what I do with my associates, for example, if they send me a brief and I review the brief, many times I'll do some spot checking of the cases just to make sure that the case says what they say it says. That's what you got to do with ChatGPT. If you're going to use it as a research tool, you got to double check it.
Yeah. In the world before ChatGPT, can you sort of give us a quick rundown of what technology, lawyers at your firm,
Sure.
How do you guys, use technology? Because obviously there's web-based search and other apps and things like that. Just kind of give us a rundown on how you use technology.
Yeah. So most law firms like ours are going to have either one of two software platforms that they use for research. You either have Westlaw or LexisNexis,
Okay.
right? Both of those platforms allow us not to have these huge libraries of books that we all used to have, 30 some odd years ago. We've had all these volumes of treatises and law books that had all these cases we had to pull from the shelf, photocopy them. That's what we used to have to do. Now Westlaw and LexisNexis are wonderful research tools that if you know how to do searches within those software platforms, that's how you find case law, secondary materials, scholarly articles in connection with a particular legal topic that you're looking into. So that's the old way, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the traditional way that we've been doing it, and we still do it that way. What's somewhat scary about ChatGPT, to be honest, is that because it has access to all of this vast amount of information that's on the internet, it literally can do some of what Westlaw and what LexisNexis can do for us as lawyers, and it does it on its own. But again, the New York case is a great example of the fact that what this guy did, he didn't just use it to go find some, maybe some controlling precedents.
Mm-hmm.
He actually used it to prepare a brief and with case sites, which were fictional case sites.
Right.
So it just made it up out of the ether. It's like if an associate had just made stuff up and gave it to me in the brief and I started spot checking and I couldn't find the cases. Same thing. Crazy.
Yeah, if you wanted to cast a lull over the use of AI in a particular industry, I mean, there's your example right there of what not to do, because it felt like there was momentum for this technology, and now everyone's going to look at this and going, "There's no way I'm going to use this." And so, I know that you said that you could still use it for research. As long as you're double checking on all of the things that it spits back out at you. But are there some other areas of the law that you think that some of these tools could be helpful with? I could give you a couple of examples if you I was going to ask if you're using this to write emails, for example.
Well, so let me give you some examples that I'm hearing some of our lawyers in our law firm. We have about 50 plus lawyers here in South Florida, and we've got practice areas in all different areas. So we have mergers and acquisitions, we have contract lawyers, we have probate and estate lawyers, we have wills and trust lawyers, right? So what I'm hearing from many of my partners and some of the associates is that sometimes if you want to just get a quick start on finding a template for a particular, let's just say a particular type of will or a particular type of trust or a particular type of purchase and sale agreement, ChatGPT can point you in the right direction. And even more specifically, we have all the forms, right? We do thousands of these transactions over the last 50 plus years.
Right.
So we have a lot of forms. But sometimes, what I'm hearing is you'll need a particular clause that you haven't used in a long time, and you plug into the software app, hey, find this force majeure clause or find this integration clause or some clause that you need for a particular document you're working on. ChatGPT can find it really quickly. It can give you that type of a clause. And again, you can't just take it verbatim.
Right.
You're going to have to take the clause, and it might be a good start. And then we, as the lawyers, are going to wordsmith it, edit it, and make sure that it conforms to whatever document we're working on. So I am seeing a lot of that, Keith, where it's a good starting point sometimes on some obscure things that maybe you need to find really quick. But again, look, the practice of law remains the same. You still have to use your experience. You have to use your expertise. You have to use the wisdom of your approach to certain problems that ChatGPT clearly doesn't have that ability at this point. Maybe it'll get there in its 10th iteration, but right now it's basically, let's call it, it's almost like a computer net of just assembling information and finding information for you. But as far as being able to, work through nuances and work through tricky and prickly issues that are inevitably going to come up in, whether it's estate planning or a purchase and sale agreement or a non-compete covenant, for example, restrictive covenants. Those are things that the lawyer's still going to have to put, kind of put the visor on and figure out what's the right language.
Right.
But again, let's not understate it. It is a good resource that can be used to help and make us more efficient, which frankly is something we can then hopefully then transmit to our clients by not having to spend as much time trying to dig up things, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, does that then endanger the use of billable hours by laws or by lawyers and firms, or is that not something that's being considered?
No, I think, Keith, where I can see that being more of a real issue is, you have younger associates generally do a lot of the, let's call it the grunt work, so to speak.
Yep.
Oftentimes helping the partners out on deals and or litigation projects. So, can it reduce billable hours? Yes, and I think it might. But by the same token, that's not the worst thing.
Right.
Because what clients want is they want efficient, fast, services. And if you as a law firm are able to, use this type of technology, whether it's ChatGPT or some other software platform that allows you to be quicker, faster, more efficient, your clients are going to appreciate it. And frankly, for the long-term health of a firm, that's a good thing.
Right.
So yes, it might cut into billable hours, and maybe at some point, the model that we currently have of billable hours and budgets and so forth, maybe it's going to change in the years to come, especially as to like the younger lawyers, the 1 to 3 to 4, 5-year lawyers that do a lot of the support work for partners on files. Maybe their billable hours are going to be less. Maybe their compensation model is going to be a little different and maybe not as tied into billable hours, because these software programs are going to enable us not to require them to bill so many hours.
Right.
And then maybe there's just a different compensation model.
Yeah. We've also seen the rise of some of these web apps and sort of internet sites. I think I've heard some of them being advertised on the radio of like, if you need a will or if you need a basic contract or if you're starting a business, you don't have to then sort of go to an attorney to draw up a lot of this stuff. And you can just go to the website and, they'll prepare a will for you for $50 or $100 or things like that. Yeah. I've got my doubts about some of these services, but do you see that, do you see that sort of ChatGPT or AI being integrated into these tools, and that maybe a non-lawyer could eventually use some of these, to either generate contracts or basic legal things so that they wouldn't have to pay a more expensive lawyer?
So look, that's a great question, and it's a valid observation. I like you, I'm still a little bit leery of those types of things because the adage of you kind of get what you pay for, that's sometimes what you see with these types of websites that offer these, like $100 contracts or $100 or $50 wills. If you think about that, at the end of the day, if it's an important enough document, whether it's a contract for the purchase and sale of a business, contract for an employee, a will, a trust, things that are important in your life, I certainly think we're still not at a point where I would recommend that anybody rely, unless again economically they can't afford to hire lawyers, and that's the best that they can do. I still would recommend trying to find at least a lawyer to provide some guidance and making sure that whatever that document is that you're getting from this website platform, that it's going to fit the bill, so to speak. Because,
right.
It's not an assembly line. The practice of law is not an assembly line. People's needs are different. people's lives are different, and you have to kind of make sure that everything is somewhat tailored to their particular needs. That doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel every time, but it does mean that you have to pay some attention and understand a client's particular needs, because there's some things that, again, ChatGPT or any of these software platforms that may be coming down the road, they're not going to know what they don't know about the particular client's needs. And that's where the lawyer, I think, becomes really invaluable. And look, do I have a bias because I'm a lawyer? Of course I do.
Yeah.
But being objective and trying to really, provide a straight message to your listeners, I think the reality is that what lawyers do and the reason that lawyers charge what they do, it's not because they just crank out forms and have clients sign them.
Right.
It's because they prepare a form and then they ask the right questions to make sure that the issues are being taken care of appropriately and that there's not some major issues that are being missed. And that's kind of where the important part of a lawyer still is. And at least at the moment, I don't think there's any technology that's gonna be able to cover that.
Yeah, I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question because it just feels like we're never going to get there. But could the next step of artificial intelligence be, sort of a quote unquote robot lawyer that comes in and makes an argument for you? If you've gotten a traffic ticket and you're not eloquent when you go to the court, to argue in front of a judge.
Right.
There were some apps that were sort of advertised when ChatGPT came out. It was like, you can have a lawyer in your pocket type of a thing, and you could have the AI argue for you. Have you sort of tested this out in terms of like ChatGPT's ability to argue a case, or are we just so far beyond like there's no critical thinking going on that and even if the AI was good enough, I can't see a judge allowing this at all in a courtroom situation?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what we're seeing. It seems to us that, certainly ChatGPT, just like this New York lawyer experience, it can definitely put together an essay or an argument, right? It can make a forceful argument, and it's really, somewhat almost appalling that it can make such a interesting argument that looks like it's cogent, it looks like it's logical, it's persuasive, et cetera. So, right now, do I think that anybody can actually rely on that? Probably not, based on what we're seeing, because what you're seeing is that ChatGPT can kind of go down a rabbit hole and just make stuff up, right? So that's a little scary. But let's just say, Keith, that in the next few years, ChatGPT starts, it starts being able to understand nuances. It starts being able to, articulate arguments, and in fact, not make up case law, but find good case law that stands for certain propositions. Could there be a time for example, in small claims court, in county court, smaller matters, right, where people are just dealing with, smaller disputes, and maybe it's not worth hiring a lawyer at $300 to $600 to $800 an hour? Yeah, it's possible that we might see it sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, that maybe these types of applications could help the general public. And by the way, if the judges start getting comfortable that the things that are being submitted are generally accurate, right, that things are not being just made up out of whole cloth,
right,
but the briefs that are being submitted or the arguments that are being submitted are in fact supported by controlling precedent, I can foresee a situation where judges might start accepting some of that and just understanding that, hey, there's not a lawyer spot checking, but everybody's moving forward with the same risk. Where you could see in family court, for example, where there's lots of disputes about, whether it's alimony or division of community property and the marital estate and so forth. There's a lot of people going through divorces that can't afford high-flying lawyers, right? They can't afford, and the marital estate is not such that it warrants hiring an army of lawyers. So, that could be a resource for folks that are dealing with, unfortunately, divorces and so forth and things like that. I would say that on larger matters, more complicated matters, things that are certainly involve much more nuance and much more understanding of the complexity of the issues, it's hard for me to foresee a time when, these types of platforms could actually be used to that parties wouldn't need lawyers and they could just represent themselves. I don't foresee that in larger and more complicated matters.
Right. Now, there was another thing that we talked about again before this show was your concern over the possibility of trade secrets. Can you sort of get it, because that's what your firm sort of deals in too, right? Is some of those issues. What are your concerns about kind of AI and trade secrets?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question because look, here's the issue. One of the things that we deal with a lot in our litigation practice is the confidentiality of clients' trade secrets and or copyright works, intellectual property, things that belong to clients that are proprietary and are very valuable to our clients, right? So because ChatGPT appears to be so powerful and it appears to be able to gather up information that's all on the internet, as we've said to many clients over the years, especially the last 20 years, as the internet has grown, is that there's a lot less and less of secrets out there because there's so much information out in the public domain. So all of that being said, we can envision situations where you have a program like ChatGPT that maybe it takes works that are protected under copyrights or things that are trade secrets that belong to companies, and it uses those in connection with either, making an argument in the public domain or in a filing actually exposes something and grabs something that otherwise was proprietary in nature because it's that powerful. So I could see situations where if somebody's not careful and doesn't understand the complexity of intellectual property rights, for example, or trade secret rights, that if somebody starts pushing a button and uses ChatGPT and relies on ChatGPT and doesn't do the analysis to make sure that, the arguments are correct, the precedents are correct, but then more importantly, on the topics of trade secrets, that there's no violations of people's trade secrets, that somehow that trade secret or that intellectual property isn't being misused in a way in a public forum, that could create exposure for the person using ChatGPT in that context. And look, it can happen innocently. They may not know that the information that's contained in something that ChatGPT put in a filing or in a document is protectable work. But they need to do the double check and make sure, where did this information come from? Let's use the basic example of the trade secret. The most famous trade secret is the formula to Coca-Cola.
I was going to say that, or the KFC 11 original
or
herbs
KFC,
and spices.
Right? Either one, right? So imagine a scenario where somehow or another, ChatGPT was able, through its powerful algorithm, to locate the formula to Coca-Cola.
Right.
And then, somebody who's using ChatGPT in some context, uses that formula in connection with whatever they're doing. And, you can give yourself lots of scenarios. Has that person violated Coca-Cola's trade secret by using it and causing ChatGPT to gather that information, and then now that person starts using it? Yeah, possibly.
Right. But, obviously that means that ChatGPT, we don't necessarily know exactly where it's getting its information from. And so the person that innocuously may have put that formula out into the public would be in trouble, right? And that's what you're advising clients, is make sure that whatever data you're putting out there into the public is protected, or you're not putting out trade secrets on those forums, right? Or
that's right. So what you're trying to look, the moral of the story with all this stuff is, and this is what we're telling clients is, look, don't just press a button and have something spit out and print it out and then not review it and not read it and not do some due diligence, right? ChatGPT appears to be, a wonderful software platform that can help you, and it certainly can assist you. And we're seeing it, not only in the practice of law, but obviously in other fields, and obviously in college students are using it as a research tool. But you are seeing some articles out there about students using it to actually just submit essays, right, in their classwork, and relying on ChatGPT. So that starts creating some layers of complexity and problems for the professors who are getting this material and reviewing it. And in our space, again, the point is, don't just click buttons and spit stuff out and not review it and not read it.
Right.
It's a great tool. It's a great resource. It might make your life a little easier, but you can't just press a button and rely on it.
What are you hearing about ChatGPT and some of these other AI tools that are being used in terms of hiring at companies? Is there still a concern? I know early on there was a concern about AI bias in some of these decisions that were being made, or the use of AI within a hiring process. Right. Like if you're hiring for someone and you get a bunch of resumes, you scan the resumes, and and I know that there was some initial bias about who the AIs were picking. Is that still a concern, or have you felt like that the technology has sort of eliminated bias or is working on it?
I mean, as best as I can tell, Keith, I mean, it's still a problem. And I'll tell you where the problem comes in. So, as we all know, we have all these federal and state laws that deal with hiring practices.
Okay.
And employers have to be really careful that they're not somehow directly or indirectly discriminating against a protected class in connection with a hiring practice. So I haven't seen anything yet that suggests to me that ChatGPT fully, at all, even incorporates or includes in the analysis of pools of candidates, whether the candidates fit a particular demographic profile, whether they have any disabilities, whether they fall into an age group, whether they fall into some ethnicity. So what could happen if you're not careful as an employer, if you're going to just rely solely on ChatGPT or some similar software to, find a pool of candidates for you, I think you still, as an HR person, for example, or some executive vice president who's in charge of hiring, you still probably need to do some due diligence about who these people are, what demographics they fall into. Are there any of these people that fall into protected classes that you have to then be careful about making sure you include them as part of the hiring practices? Because if the AI somehow excludes a group of folks that fall into a protected class, you as an employer might be susceptible to some claims based on allegations of discriminatory hiring practices. So I don't think the AI is quite there yet. And I still think it's an issue. So again, that's a great example of it can help you. It can certainly maybe cut down on some of the legwork,
right?
But I don't think, again, you can solely rely upon it. You're going to have to do some due diligence with respect to that.
Are clients coming to you with a lot of these questions about sort of like, oh, we want to use this tool, we want to use that tool. What do you suggest, or what should I be asking the developers of this tool, or if they're developing it themselves?
So we are getting some questions from clients in connection with specifically hiring practices, because that certainly one of the big costs that many of our clients have is the HR department, and the HR department many times, especially for large institutional clients, they're constantly dealing with people coming and going and needing to fill positions. So the ChatGPT program and that software can be used to kind of make their jobs a little easier. But then the question then becomes, okay, what are the pitfalls, right? And we just covered a few of the pitfalls.
Yep.
You got to make sure that if they're going on, for example, Monster.com or ZipRecruiters, and it's going to be used to call from one of those software platforms some viable candidates, you're probably going to want to make sure that those viable candidates it's kind of a diverse population of candidates, right? You want to just make sure you don't want to basically have, let's just say, 40 applicants that happen to be all white males under the age of 40. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster, right? I mean, so make sure that the pool is pretty diverse. And I don't think it's that hard to do that. I mean, I think you can certainly make sure that you have a diverse population of prospective candidates. And what I don't know the answer to, Keith, at the moment is, I don't know if you can use the platform and maybe customize the platform such that, if you get an initial pool that isn't diverse enough, can you then ask, change the query? And I think you probably could, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know firsthand. Change the query to find pools of candidates that fall into a particular category, ethnic minority, over the age of 40, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can do that, then again, it might be, a good resource to help you in finding prospective candidates that might be good, viable.
Right. Do you have either attorneys at the firm or other lawyers that you've talked to that might just be like, oh, this AI stuff is either a fad or a trend, or I'm so concerned about all of these things that I don't want to use it at all. Do you get any of that, or are most people sort of curious and optimistic about the use of the technology?
I think it's the latter, Keith. I think
Okay.
it's most people are pretty curious about it, pretty optimistic about it, and I think are anxiously, kind of monitoring
Yeah.
how it is developing and how it can be a useful tool in their practices. So I really haven't heard too many people, naysayers that think it's either a fad or it's going to go away,
Yeah.
or this is all just hooey and let's just do things the old-fashioned way. At least not in my law firm.
Okay, but I guess the point I wanted to make was that if people were not interested in using sort of ChatGPT and AI tools in the use of their own legal work, they still should be aware of this technology, because people are suing OpenAI and people are suing the companies that come out with this stuff, where you've got issues of copyright and defamation. I think there was a story the other day about ChatGPT defaming someone. The interesting part about the technology that I find is that every time you type in a prompt, the result that you get is unique. So you can never get the same answer twice, which then begs the question of almost like liability if something goes wrong. Like, obviously in the case where we were talking about with this lawyer that used obviously he's liable for the response that or could you argue that, well, ChatGPT, should be responsible, or who's responsible for some of the things that could go wrong? Like, so issues of liability come up, and it feels like attorneys should know about all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
listen, it's the old saying, the buck stops here. The buck stops with the lawyer. So, if you're using the software, you're using it with all of the attendant risks that are going to be connected to it. So, when you sign something as a lawyer, right, you file something in court, or you use a document in connection with a particular transaction, or you use a will that you got from the internet, right? And if you use that, your license is on the line. It's really
Right.
your name and your credibility. So no, I think ChatGPT really is not going to be the responsible party. Ultimately, it's the human being that is behind using it, and maybe using it in a careless fashion, or more to the point, maybe a lazy fashion. Because again, to use the New York lawyer, it sounds like he just thought the brief looked great. The cases must be correct. He didn't do any spot checking, and he just filed it. And now he's facing the ire of a judge who's probably going to sanction him pretty well.
I love the fact that we keep coming back to this case, but it was so amazing that this story came out.
It's remarkable.
Yeah,
Remarkable.
yeah. It just boggles my mind. Are you enthusiastic about the future of the technology, though? It's like, could you see sort of AI lawsuits or lawsuits against AI piling up, where the technology then becomes less effective or not as exciting as it's been in the last? Because again, we keep referring to this as the Wild West. Is the Wild West about to go away?
Well, here's the issue. Lawsuits. Nobody likes lawsuits, right? But
Not even
sometimes,
lawyers, Paul.
well, sometimes we like lawsuits. But
Okay.
no, the truth is, lawsuits are problems, right? Lawsuits are problems that are your client's problems, either because you have to go sue somebody because there's a major dispute, or you're being sued and you're representing a company.
Yep.
But lawsuits sometimes are helpful in the sense that they flush out issues, and and you're able to litigate issues, and you're able to really get to the core of a problem. So yeah, there's going to be lawsuits in the AI context. And sure, we're seeing that now. But some of those lawsuits, in my mind, are probably going to help us all flush out some of the problems, some of the deficiencies, some of the weaknesses of AI, and really highlight that. And then and in turn, the programmers and the developers of AI, are going to learn, and they're going to refine the programs, and they're going to continue to evolve the programs and develop the programs, so that it continues to kind of grow and becomes more and more accepted and more credible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think the lawsuits are going to somehow truncate what's happening with AI. I think, it's kind of like, the horse is out of the barn, right? I mean, it's out.
Right.
There's no way it's coming back in. Now the question is, what's it going to look like? How's it going to develop? And then, importantly, as we talked a little bit offline, what kind of regulations might be put in place to oversee some of this AI technology? Because we're seeing that now, that there's discussions among Congress and the Senate about figuring out what are the ways to regulate this and control it so that it doesn't run amok, so to speak, and create lots of exposure and lots of problems for society in general. Because again, technology is great, but it also can run amok, and it can also be a negative detriment and negative.
Yeah, it does sound like you're a tech optimist around this sort of technology. If you had to go in front of a judge who was skeptical, like, what would be your big argument for the use of ChatGPT, even if it's use of it with guardrails? Would you be able to make that argument at this point, or do you still want to wait and see?
Well, look, probably more on the wait and see, because I'm conservative by nature, but I am optimistic about it. And by the way, I'm the least technical person around. But that being said, I recognize what an advantage that type of a tool can give us, so that we are, again, efficient with our time, right? I mean, again, going back to the example from 30 years ago, we used to have to, burn hours and hours and hours researching issues and plotting through books. I mean, our researching now is so much more efficient than it was 30 years ago. I can see where this AI is going to make our researching capabilities even that much more efficient.
Right.
So if the project, 30 years ago took us 10 hours to research, and now through the current software programs without AI, it takes us 2 hours, AI might be able to, help us knock it out in half an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, and time is the key for us, as lawyers. Everything that we do is about our time.
Yeah.
And if we can be more efficient and get great results for our clients, I'm all in favor of that. That's why I'm a tech optimist.
Right. As long as the cases that this thing is giving you are correct and real, right?
Let's make sure they're actual cases.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. All right. And speaking of time, I think we're out of time. Paul, thanks a bunch for being on the show with us today.
Anytime, Keith. It was a lot of fun.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and add any comments you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.